Hey guys, it's Chef Tom here. Today we're going to talk about flavor and how to make your foods taste better. In order to understand how to make foods taste great, first you need to understand a couple principles. One, understand the moment, and two, understand the ingredients. Understand the moment is what temperature is it outside, or hey, are we barbecuing? Like you want to kind of go in that barbecue direction. Is it a wedding? You kind of want to go in that wedding direction. You know, what are you celebrating? Are you celebrating anything, or are you just having a family dinner? Understanding the moment, understanding what's going on outside, understanding the feelings that are happening around you. Am I cooking for my kids? Am I cooking for my parents? Those all play very key factors into what whoever you're cooking for is going to perceive as being great. You know, like say your father doesn't like tomatoes, you don't use tomatoes, that's going to go a long way to making that food taste great. If you put ingredients in there that they don't like, they're not going to like it. And then two, understanding the ingredients. Yeah, you need to understand the ingredients. You need to understand, how does this meat get cooked? What's this vegetable going to bring to the dish? What are these spices and herbs going to bring to the dish? How does all that combine together? How does the salty, sweet, bitter, sour, what does that mean to this dish? So what is flavor? Flavor is a combination of both your taste and aroma, which comes from your nose. Smell is actually responsible for 80 to 90% of what we perceive as flavors. This works when you put food in your mouth and you're chewing it. Molecules of the food go up and mingle with your palate and then also enter your nasal cavity, and that's where most of the flavor profiles and aromatics are translated by your brain. What does the mouth perceive? The mouth perceives salty, sour, sweet, bitter, and umami. Let's start with salt. Salt is a natural flavor enhancer. I would say it's one of the most critical steps of making food taste good. Salt is to flavor as color is to vision. So imagine that if you didn't have color, your vision would be nothing. It would just be like black and white. You could make a dish and you could not season it, and you could taste it here and you'd be like, wow, that tastes like nothing. And then you can have that exact same dish that you made with salt added to it, and you'd be like, oh wow, that's amazing. You don't want a food to be perceptibly salty. You don't want people to be like, oh wow, that food is salty. You want to bring it right to before that point. And that's the perfect point to be at. That's where your tongue really opens up. It opens up your taste buds and you are able to taste the ingredients better. Next, let's talk about sense of sour. I would say that's probably the second most critical component of making food taste great. Acids are very oftentimes underutilized. When I make a dish and I'm like, oh wow, I think that needs something, it's usually a little bit of acid. A lot of recipes don't call for acids, and just in straight up general cooking, a lot of foods could use some acid. Acids really help brighten up a dish, liven it up. Sour and acids really help kind of bring everything together. Acids can really help cut through fatty, heavy ingredients. Sweetness comes from all kinds of different ingredients. I mean, naturally found in them. You got like carrots, corn, fruits, and then you have processed sugars like molasses and just sugar in general. Really kind of helps round out a dish. So we have a natural aversion to bitterness. It's a survival mechanism so that we don't eat poisonous plants. Kids don't like bitterness naturally for that reason. But as we get older, we acquire a taste to it, like such as coffee, cocoa, hops, and beer. Certain lettuces that are pretty bitter. But understanding how bitterness plays a factor in the balance of taste, it can add a lot of complexity to your foods, but usually it will need to be paired with some sort of sweetness or acid and salt to really help it come through. Umami. This compound can be found in anchovies, blue cheese, mushrooms, tomatoes, all sorts of ingredients. It's also what MSG is, monosodium glutamate. A lot of people think that's a bad thing. It's not. It's like a purified version of glutamate. Also, umami has been described as kind of a combination of all the taste, the sour, the sweet, the bitter, the salty, all combined has been also described as umami, but it's really like a satiated, savory experience. So one of the key aspects of making food taste good is to understand the different tastes and finding like a really good balance between them. Like you want that salty, you want that sweet, you want that sour, you want that bitterness. Figuring out how those relate to each other is going to be one of the key steps for you to understand how to make food taste better. So let's talk about using spices and aromatics. I'd say that's a very important thing to know how to do and utilize in your cooking. You got spices, you got herbs, you got like chili peppers, citrus zest, different types of aromatic oils like sesame oil. It can really help accentuate the flavors of food, and I'd say they're key ingredients to many, many dishes. They can either be a main component of the dish or they can help accentuate the ingredients that are in that dish. If you don't want them to be like one of the main ingredients, then you want to make sure you don't overpower the dish with those aromatics and let the other ingredients shine, but just kind of have a little bit in there to help accentuate it. It's important to know when to add the aromatics to your food. Sometimes you want to add them early, sometimes you want to add them late. Oftentimes you want to kind of add them towards the end, like say fresh herbs, for example, inside of soup. If your house smells like the herbs, most likely what you're smelling has come out of the soup and it's not in the soup anymore. So if I'm going to add fresh herbs to something, I'm going to add it towards the end or not cook it at all. Dry herbs, on the other hand, I'll add earlier to help break them up, get those essential oils out of them. But fresh herbs and like say citrus zest, I'm going to add that towards the end so that those essences stay inside the food. So you're going to want to use compatible flavor profiles. There's so many ingredients out there, and all the combinations that you can make with them, it could be infinite. Really knowing what flavors really mesh well together will really help you understand how to make your food taste better. Really good resource for knowing flavor profiles is the Flavor Bible. I'll put a link for that down in the description. But yeah, really knowing what goes together really well will really help elevate your food game. Very, very important aspect of making food taste great is using the proper cooking technique. Think like fried chicken, you know, if you're not frying it, it's not gonna taste as good. Like if you're baking it, I mean, it might be all right, but it's not gonna be as good as frying. Or if you have like some really tough meats, you're gonna wanna braise that meat slowly over a couple hours to help break it down so it's not super tough and it's nice and moist and it melts in your mouth. Or like salads. Salads you're gonna wanna eat fresh and raw. Like you might have some ingredients in there like nuts. You're gonna wanna toast the nuts off. If you put the nuts on there when they're raw, they're not gonna be as good as if they're toasted. Say you're searing off a piece of raw tuna, you're not gonna wanna like cook the tuna till it's well done. You're gonna wanna sear it off and have it mostly raw. That brings me to another point, the Maillard reaction. You might not have ever heard of that, but I'm very certain that you've encountered it. What that is when you sear meat and it turns brown, that's the Maillard reaction. And I mean, you can walk into a room where somebody's grilling burgers or searing off steaks and you're like, oh wow, that smells amazing. That also happens when you're toasting bread. It's the same thing. Any kind of like browning, what it is it's proteins and carbohydrates coming in contact with heat and creating a browning reaction. And I mean, that tastes great. Like coffee, roasted coffee beans, that's Maillard reaction. There's a thing with like soup. If you ever made soup, you usually will realize that it tastes better the next day than it did the day you made it. That's because you gave the food time to marry. You want to not rush your food. Some foods need to take a while to kind of marry the flavors together. Like if you're making sauces or soups or you're marinating meat, you want to get that marinated or simmering and let those flavors marry. Brings out a lot more complexity to the food, knowing when to add ingredients. Like I said earlier, some ingredients you want to add right away and let them start cooking. Some ingredients you want to add at the very end, maybe even after you turn off the heat, just to kind of let them sit there in the warm liquid and disperse. But you don't want to either overcook those ingredients. Say like you have like green onions inside of like a soup or something. You want the green onions to be nice and green. You don't want them to turn to mush, so you would add those in at the end. Seasonality. You want to get the ingredients fresh at their peak conditions, their peak ripeness. Food is always best when it's in season. It can also help bring back nostalgic memories of years past. Another good resource is if you live in an area where they have farmers markets, go check out the farmers markets. The produce there is going to most likely be in season, and it's going to be properly ripened. It's not going to be grown in a greenhouse like 500 miles away. Seasonality can also help mix up like your ingredients. You're not always using the same thing. You're using what's in season, gives you a little variety. People don't like eating the same thing all the time. Next, we're going to talk about texture and mouthfeel. Texture can be anywhere from creamy to crunchy. Oftentimes, more soft foods are recognized as being comfort foods, while crunchy foods can be oftentimes thought as more fun. However you break it down, texture is a very key part of the mouthfeel experience of when you eat food. Think about it like you bite into like a sandwich and it has some onions in there, it has a nice crunch, or some lettuce, or you have some nuts inside of like a rice dish or something like that. It kind of breaks up the blandness and gives you like something to think about when you're eating. Think about a burger and the cheese that's on there. That cheese really kind of helps coat your tongue and it gives you like that satiated feeling. Think of a burger without cheese, think of a burger with cheese. What would you rather have? And it really comes down to that mouthfeel. You can sprinkle like seeds or nuts or have some sort of crispy element to a dish. Just to kind of break up the monotony of it. Sometimes you need to let the ingredients speak for themselves. If you're getting like ingredients that are at the peak of their freshness in season, sometimes you don't want to overcomplicate those ingredients. You want to let them speak for themselves. And understanding the purpose of those ingredients in the dish, you can go overboard with messing around with food, and knowing the distinction between too much and too little is oftentimes what makes a great cook. Knowing what to add to make something taste better. Does it feel like it's missing something? Oftentimes when I feel like something's missing, it's oftentimes acid or salt. I usually start with those, and then after that it'll usually be like a texture thing or maybe a slight aromatic that I'll add to a dish. But using sound judgment is also another critical point between being a good cook and not. As a general rule, I use recipes as a guideline for myself being experienced. If you're following recipes and you feel like the recipe's lacking something after you made it, or like, hey, I don't know if this is the way it should have turned out, you can use the techniques that I've shown you to kind of spice it up a bit, liven it up. I will generally follow baking recipes to a T though, because they're more science than they are art. Temperature. What temperature is the dish supposed to be? If it's supposed to be served hot, it's going to be a lot better if you serve it hot. If it's cold, you want it to be cold. One thing to consider about this is cold can suppress your taste buds and like the sensation of sweet and salty. The molecules aren't moving around as rapidly. They're not going to get around in your nasal passage as much. So oftentimes, like say ice cream, for example, if you take it straight out of the freezer, it might not taste as good as if you pull it out 10 minutes early and let it soften up a bit. Also, when it comes to temperature, you have to think about what's going on outside. If it's hot outside, people are going to want things like chilled drinks, ice cream, salads. If it's cold outside, people are going to want soups, hotter dishes. That's going to make your food taste better. If the people are in the mood for the food at a certain temperature, ice cream is going to taste a lot better when it's hot outside opposed to when it's freezing outside. Visual. You'll oftentimes hear that you eat with your eyes before you eat with your mouth. So imagine sitting down at a fancy restaurant and the food comes out to you and you're looking at it and you're like, oh wow, that looks amazing. So you're eating with your eyes before you even taste it. You also have the aroma thing happening. The food could look great, it could taste like dog food, but you're already kind of impressed by the way it looks. That's like getting your foot in the door. A lot of enjoyment that you get from food is just the whole experience, and the better food looks, the better it's gonna taste. So I'd say the next time you're out eating and you're maybe eating something that you're like, oh wow, this is great, stop and think about that. Like what about that dish is great, and kind of dissect it. Like, why is it great? Is it the moment? Is it the temperature? Is it the flavors? Is it the textures? Does it look good? and just take note, like, hey, what is it that's making this plate of food taste so good? And just kind of experimenting with that, you know, like take it home, see if you can figure out what was going on there. Trying out different dishes from different cultures, experiment, have fun, play with it. Well, I hope this shed some light on flavor, and I hope that y'all can grow from this video and make some good dishes. Let me know in the comments what you made and if this video helped you at all. Please like and subscribe. Thank you.